is a perfect setting for that.
Yeah. So Kristen, what I think would be really helpful is if you could explain to people who might not be familiar with Minima what it is you do, but also how in the world did you get started doing this very interesting niche thing?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting story, and I'll give the abbreviated version. There's a blog post on Minima's website called My Minimalism Journey if you want like all the nitty gritty. But basically, my training is as an architect. I studied at Virginia Tech. I came to Richmond in '06 after graduating, and I was like, cool, I'm going to be an architect. I was actually really unhappy. But I was like, this is the plan. And then the housing market crash happened in '08. And I was working for a very small local residential firm with 6 employees, and half of us got laid off. And I was like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? And kind of panicked. And then a friend said, hey, have you heard about the National Association of Productivity and Organizing Experts? And I was like, no, that's not just an HGTV thing, that's a job. And this was like before Marie Kondo, so like it was still, there weren't a whole lot of organizers out in the field yet. So I went to one of the local chapter meetings, got hired by another organizer, and trained under her. She's still a mentor, and then started Minima in 2010, so we're going on 13 years. And the minimalism journey kind of happened because not every professional organizer would identify as a minimalist, but I personally do. We're never aggressive with our clients about that philosophy, but I think myself especially and all of our employees kind of do carry it with us. I actually also stumbled upon minimalism out of necessity. So I think a lot of people see it as this luxury for the wealthy, and they think of it as an aesthetic, but what we're going to talk about a lot is how minimalism and organization is more of a philosophy and a lifestyle, and it can look a lot of different ways. It can be colorful, it can be muted, it's not really about that. But basically, in the time between losing my architecture job and founding Minima, and even after founding Minima, I was under or unemployed. So this was 2 to 3 years of earning like 12 grand a year probably. And
I felt smaller.
Yeah. But through minimalism, and I didn't know that it was minimalism at the time, but then I kind of like started hearing that word and reading more about it. I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing. I'm assessing every object in my life, assessing whether or not it's adding value, and like selling things. Literally, I had to stay afloat. But what I learned is I didn't miss anything. And so like as my life circumstances have evolved, I've carried that lesson with me, and it's, I can really go to a client and say, I promise you, you can live a lighter life, a freer life with less, because, I went through that.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a valuable life lesson, but it was hard, but that's kind of what led me to this.
Well, I mean, you hit on so many interesting things, because I think, you're right, people, I think, have all kinds of perceptions. And I imagine you have a lot of barriers you have to overcome when you start working with clients. To say, well, look, I could do it, I love it, but I have this husband or this partner or these children, right? And so, how do you convince people it's not about doing without, or about, an austere philosophy? What does that look like?
So usually we talk a lot about defining your vision when we initially meet with someone. So getting to that why did you call us? Like, what is bringing you discontent, and how can we help overcome that? And we will get into like, oh, well, maybe we could move this piece of furniture over here, or maybe this, organizing solution, but it's more about like creating a home that supports your vision, talking about things to subtract from the space, because I think most people see a problem and their instinct is to add to solve the problem. I'm actually reading this great book called Subtract by Leedy Kratz right now, and it's the biology of humans wanting to add as a problem-solving thing. It's really interesting. It's very scientific. But anyway, so we really, and if people are talking about, oh, my husband this, or my partner, or my kids, we say start with you, start with what you have control over, because what we've almost always found is when because it's almost always like in a partnership, one partner calls, and sometimes it's a team effort, and that's great, but a lot of times they're like, yeah, my husband or my wife, they're really not into this, but so we just work with them, and then we say, set the example. usually find is by them setting the example. Like, there's been so many instances where then the other person is like, I'm really jealous of my partner's closet. Can we hire you back to do mine now? And so a lot of times they come around, but always start with what you can control and know that it's really about identifying your why. You don't have to know what it's going to look like. It's more of a feeling, I think, is a good way to put it.
Well, you said that it's about a philosophy more than I mean, I know you have a lot of methodology because I've heard people talk about how great it works, but how do you get, like, what is that philosophy and how, especially somebody like me? So I mean, you can see from the shop, I would describe myself as more of a maximalist. But I do love things. Now, great design is about editing, and it's about knowing when and where to take away. But I love flavors. I do love color. I love to surround myself with meaningful objects. But for me, those things and those objects that I have collected and curated connect me to people or memories or experiences. So how do you, how do those philosophies coexist?
Yeah, they do coexist. So I would define clutter as anything that gets in the way of your vision. So if those things are adding value for you and they're not getting in the way, they're not clutter. Even if my space might look different from yours, that doesn't mean that like you're failing, by having more things. It's not about how many things you have. It's about the things that you have being intentionally selected, adding value to your life and your vision and your goals. Like within that, editing, so Minima's mission statement with my architecture background is make what is necessary beautiful. So it's all about, eliminating the excess and then working with what remains to create something beautiful and meaningful. I think that you can do that with whether you would identify as a maximalist or a minimalist. It's more about, is it adding value? Is it getting in the way or not?
I imagine a lot of the work you do too. You sort of said you start with the why. Go inside first.
Yeah.
How do you get people to kind of part with their, loosen their death clutch on some things, right? That they can say, but here's why it's meaningful, or it might be useful one day when, if. I mean, I feel like every time I do the massive purge, there's always one or two things that I'm like, a month later, I'm like, oh, where's that belt? I needed that.
Well, I found that humans are very resourceful. Like, if we don't have, in fact, perfect example, I ran out of packing tape and I was like, man, I forgot to add that to my last Target order. I used duct tape. It was fine. You work with what you have, and then when I went to Curating Pack and Ship, I was like, can I borrow a few pieces of your packing? It's fine.
Yeah.
Like, I think we're hardwired, and this is actually kind of going into that book I was reading called Subtract. We're hardwired to want to be prepared for every possible scenario, and that actually gets in the way of living in the moment.
Yeah.
So I have a saying that don't let your past or possible future drown out the now. So what so many people do is they're holding on to, and there's nothing wrong with having keepsake. Like, my husband and I have a box of sentimental stuff, but we've limited the boundaries to a box. And then anything else is on display. But don't let, you don't want that stuff to be so out of control that it's getting in the way.
Yeah. And
you don't want I might need this category to get in the way of you living your best possible life right now.
Yeah.
So anytime you're keeping something based on a fear of something where you can't actually picture yourself using it specifically, it's probably a good idea to let it go. I haven't really ever deeply regretted letting something go. I mean, I think there's been times where it might have been nice to have had whatever, but it's fine.
Yeah.
But there's a whole Minima journal that I wrote on my website called Beyond Sparking Joy, because that's like the Marie Kondo approach.
Right.
How to decide what to keep or discard. And it goes through like 20 questions to ask. So we use a lot of those techniques with our clients. And another technique too is when we physically show up to help people organize, we gather everything from a zone. So like all of the clothes or all of the kitchen, all of the books, regardless of what rooms they were in, and show it to the client. And it's sort of like this shocking moment for almost everyone. They're like, we've had clients go, did you bring that in here? That was not in my closet. Like, I did not have that much stuff. So I think seeing the whole collection really helps you separate out those things that are adding value to your life versus the stuff. Like, whenever we do our house tour and people see mine and my husband's closet, everybody, it's 41 inches wide by about 10 feet tall, so we've got a lot of vertical height to work with. We have an alpha system in there from the Container Store, but 2 or 3 people have said, I only wear the same thing all the time. Like, I could do this. I'm like, exactly. We wear everything that's in there. Yeah. And so we don't have anything that's getting in the way of us, like, getting on with our day and doing the things that matter. So that's, like, a good example of.
And, we've seen that when we go into clients' homes, too, that I think so much of the first punch of value that we can offer is just being a new set of eyes. Yeah. But you've got to be able to see past things to see what you have. And if you can, I think when you can get rid of the things you don't love, or they're like, oh, my mother gave me that, but it's really expensive, or it's been in the family forever, but I've never really liked it. And if you can get rid of those things, you can see the things you love, and just appreciate them more, but also see them potentially in new lights. That like, oh, that dresser that's always been in the bedroom doesn't have to stay in the bedroom. If I'm like, have you ever thought about moving that here? And it's the same thing. They're like, oh, it's a totally different piece of furniture.
Absolutely. Sometimes
but you can't see sometimes what you've got or how beautiful something is. When
that's so true.
It's just buried, cluttered with so many other things.
No, you're totally right. And I think I have a saying that's any home can be a dream home through simplicity and minimalism. And so I would say that even the apartment I had when I was making $12K a year was my dream home at that time, because like I deep cleaned it before I moved in, and like I had IKEA and hand-me-downs, but I intentionally arranged it and maximized the natural light and the space and the flow. And my landlord came over to fix the toilet one day, and he goes, "This is the most beautiful one of these." They were all the same apartment I'd ever seen. Like, who decorated it or whatever? I was like,
I love that.
So just being resourceful with what you have, looking at things in a new light. And when you do edit down, like we're talking about editing, it is a necessary step. The things that you love and have value, a natural arrangement is going to come about really organically, is what I found. And I don't know if you find this too in your line of work, but I feel like some of the best design moments are happy accidents.
Absolutely.
So when I'm stuck, you know this so well, you're tortured by it. I'm like, I need to create, like maybe for your birthday, like a post to honor you of like holding pictures of my husband holding things up in different places on the wall. Like, he's like, "This is heavy, can I put this down now?" But just rearranging, and sometimes I'll go so extreme that I'll like completely flip a room, like our home office. I was doing that last week. I completely redid the desks and like looked at it a different way for a few days, and then I was like, no, the sun's too bright that way. I put it back, but I had like put a Muji clock on the wall that we had brought from our old place, and somehow like that anchored the space the way that a rug that I was trying to do that with a rug. It was like the tiniest detail, and suddenly the original arrangement worked. So I would definitely challenge you to just completely flip things upside down and not be afraid to do that, because something that you couldn't have preconceived will come out of it. Like always the best moments happen that way.
I think that's right. I love that. We actually tell our clients at the beginning of a design project that like something is going to go wrong on this project. We don't know what it's going to be, but something's going to go wrong.
It's going to be the rug.
I've
returned so many rugs.
Many rugs. Yes. And I'll be like, I'll look at you at some point and be like, this is the moment. Remember the time I told you? And hopefully I only have to say it once.
Smart.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if you will remember it. but the next thing I tell them is, there's also always a happy accident in every single good design project where it didn't go maybe the way we thought it would. But to your point about being resourceful, I've always been a big believer that limitations are wonderful to breed creativity.
It's my favorite
when you've got constraints, I'm looking at those wonderful artists, and they're just like, when you've got constraints, you do have to actually be so much more creative, whether it's with what you have or how you use things. So there is something to it. Less is more.
I love constraints. Like when I was in that apartment and I had no money to buy art, I had this huge wall, and I was like, I need to create something. Like I want to put something on the wall. I always start with like furniture and lighting, and then art on the wall is always the last for me. But I was like, okay, I have no budget for this. And I thought, and I was like, I really love origami. Maybe I can make like a 3-dimensional wall sculpture. So I transposed an actual flock of birds in Photoshop and like measured it to the T, because I told you about my measuring. Like when I hang art on the wall, it's like a mathematician, like architect lines. But I measured it out, so it was like an organic flock of birds made out of origami, and it was awesome, and it was practically free. I used like some 3M hooks and some like tissue paper or something.
Cool.
Yeah, so I was like, what can I do with my limited resources? Whereas if I had had like all the options in the world, probably would have just spun around and around and around, returned a bunch of stuff, and
yeah. Oh, I love that. Would you give me pictures of that? I'd love to see it.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Hey, the other thing I wonder a lot, because we've referred people back and forth, I know. So, what do you think is the ideal situation? That somebody says, yep, once I remodel this kitchen and redo this kitchen, then we're going to organize? Or do you think there's like a hybrid, or do they start with you and then we figure out what the design looks like?
A lot of it depends on just like, sometimes they've already started by the time they engage us, but the best time is before in our experience, because a lot of times we always recommend, like, let's say a kitchen renovation is a perfect example. I remember this was a really cool full circle moment. So the architect I worked for before leaving the industry was Patrick Farley at Watershed, if you all are familiar with him. And so he was working on a kitchen design for this beautiful mid-century home, and the client had hired me to do whole home organization, and the kitchen was one of the projects, and she hadn't signed off on his design yet, and she was really concerned about like wanting to keep a lot of the original layout, but like they weren't sure they would have enough storage, they were gonna maybe have to add a wall or something. So I worked with her to minimize the kitchen and minimize the stuff she didn't need and maximize the flow. And they were able to like win in both accounts. Like they were able to keep like the flow, but like upgrade the like cabinets and the appliances, so it like made everybody's job easier.
Wow.
Because she was able to click, before it was like nothing works. And then by maximizing the existing organization, she was able to really pinpoint what worked and what didn't.
That's really interesting. I love that.
And I think that's the case with like a closet or any, I would always try to organize and minimize first.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that goes back to what you said originally too. Is sometimes people might be looking for a design solution and to add to.
Right. When this isn't working, so I need to like completely change everything or move to a new house.
Right. It's like there could be some smaller solutions, some band-aids,
more affordable, less like people.
I love that. Yeah, because that's gonna come with its own host of headaches. So
yeah, there's always, and before I forget, you were saying you have that moment of like something's gonna go wrong.
Yeah.
I've told my team, 3 of them are sitting over there, by the way. You can raise your hands. It's a Minima group. So we'll order product for a client, and we can't possibly know exactly what's gonna go in every single bin, but we're very spatially minded. We can estimate. And I remember telling Alex when I was more like on the site, on jobs more, being like, make it work if things didn't fit exactly how we thought, because there was always like 6 different ways to solve the problem. There wasn't one right way. It's like, we have these beautiful streamlined containers if that's what the client had asked for, and okay, it didn't go exactly how we planned, but we figured it out.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of like design and organization at its best. Like get a general idea and then roll with it, because you're probably going to discover a lot of unforeseen things along the way, good and bad.
Well, and that's, at its core, that's what good design is it's about solving a problem.
I agree. Yeah.
And we forget that. It's like, oh, it's not just pretty. I mean, I love your mission statement, that it starts with what you need.
Yeah.
And
make what is necessary beautiful.
Yes, that's great. And I think too often we start with putting the lipstick on it and trying to make it look pretty, and it's not really addressing what's really going on.
There's this great quote, I'm probably going to butcher her name, I think Francois, I think is her name, but it's, one can furnish a room very luxuriously by taking things out rather than adding things in. And it's so true.
I love that.
The natural light and the breathing room and all that.
So if someone was to try to, besides obviously going home and looking at your website to look for the list of the 20 things they can do, like what is something, an exercise somebody could do to sort of start that inventory? If there's like one space in their home that they just, because there's also the starting point, right? Like you just feel overwhelmed. I don't know if y'all have that, but it's just like, okay, okay, I know I have to do something about this. Let me just shut the door on that one more day. But it can be daunting.
Yeah.
So thinking about like, what does that self-inquiry look like?
So I mean, definitely identifying your why, because that's going to motivate you. Like if it's about, I want to spend more time with my family, I want to like reach financial freedom, I want to eat better, I want to feel better, I want to get better sleep, whatever your like driving why is, we always recommend putting that down. That's your vision. That's always something to go back to when you feel stuck or burn out. But then also starting with the easy. Don't start with like your grandmother's keepsakes. Don't start with paperwork. I mean, unless that's like your number one thing. But some great places to start would be clothing or the kitchen, because those are spaces you use every day. You probably know what adds value and what doesn't, whereas something like books might be a little bit harder. So yeah, start with easy and figure out your why.
So let's talk about that to get people motivated and excited. So we said, you know, great design is about solving a problem beautifully. And you threw out some pretty lofty whys there. Like, I love the idea of designing a space that does help people be the best version of themselves. So it's January, everybody's trying to eat better, dry January, all those things. So talk to me about how by thinking differently about your kitchen, maybe, that actually you're designing an environment that helps you be healthier. Like what does that look like?
He's the chef in our home. No, so I think in general, like the kitchen is a great example because it's like directly related to the food we're consuming. But I think anytime your home is really intentional, what we see is a lot of times when someone has a lot of clutter, that's just like a distraction. And then when you clear out the clutter, like when I think back to my unemployment days, I had no ability to distract myself from my very real situation and take a hard look at like, what did I want my life to be? Am I going to leave architecture behind? Am I going to make this huge career life change? Like, am I going to leave Richmond? What am I going to do? I was really like, didn't have any distractions. So I think like eliminating the clutter helps you reach your life goals because you're thinking about them and you're faced with them and you're not constantly it's sort of like, clutter is like constant text messages and notifications on your phone. It's just like pinging you and distracting you and disrupting your day. So like if your kitchen is organized, you're going to be able to find the food easily. You're going to be able to cook without getting stressed. Maybe you're going to enjoy cooking. Maybe you're going to enjoy trying new recipes. Like same with clothing. If like all of your clothing fits and it's stuff that you love and feel good and it's all pretty interchangeable, you're not going to get up in the morning and feel bad about yourself after like 5 minutes. So it's just like my personal vision for my life is just to feel very peaceful all the time and just to be able to focus on doing the things that I love every day and maximizing my time with my family, doing the work for Minima, getting good sleep is super important. And so I feel like I'm on vacation when I'm home usually, unless I have a renovation going on.
Well, I know you've been living in a renovation, but your home feels so peaceful. I mean, I jokingly told her I wanted to burn everything.
That was the highest number because I've been in houses where I felt that way. She goes, I want to go home and burn my house down and start over. I was like, I know what that feels like. Thank you so much.
Everything felt so just serene and beautiful. And again, I'm a maximalist, so I was shocked by my own reaction to it. But I say all that to say, I think you've achieved that, certainly, I know in the conversations we've had for yourself, but as a visitor in your home, I could feel that sense of peace there too.
Yeah, it keeps me, like a lot of people meet me, they're like, you seem so calm. And I'm like, I'm a naturally very anxious person. So like, I definitely have tried to design my life around not triggering that, like staying calm, like Pilates is super important for me to zen out and getting good sleep and just be able to move around and about in a space that's rejuvenating instead of draining.
That's great.
Yeah.
We're going to open it up to some questions that you all might have.
Don't be shy.
I always have so many questions. I love you use the word breathing room, and I have been going room to room in my apartment trying to minimalize certain spaces, and obviously it's better to do one small for me, one at a time. So my living room is my zen space. When I walk in, I'm like I can feel my my lungs feel like I feel light and fresh. But if I walk into a cluttered space, like my closet, for example, is a steaming mess.
I just imagine steam coming off
It's
the
a sauna.
Yeah.
I can feel my body
Like viscerally reacting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how do you work with your clients with the concept of breathing room? Is that something that you like bring into is it part of the discussion? I'm just interested in hearing stories about that.
Yeah, so are you speaking about like how would you approach your closet to create breathing room, or was that just sort of a
It's like
counterpoint
general,
to
like whatever comes to your mind, just whatever you first think of.
well, so I love Japanese culture and Scandinavian culture. Those are two of my biggest influences, and Japanese have a word called ma. It's just ma, which means I'm not sure the direct translation, but it talks about the negative space in the breathing room as being equally as important as what's physically there, so like the negative and the positive space. And so I think that it's okay to have empty space. It's okay to have pauses between like whatever design moments. Like I think as humans, we want to just fill every corner. Like that's our instinct, like our hunter-gatherer, biological, hardwired instinct that doesn't necessarily serve us so much in today's day and age. But I would say just like thinking about those moments of ma in your home. But with your clothing, I think like with Minima's mission statement, make what is necessary beautiful. I did like a little creative mornings talk about how every drawer, every closet, every space in your home is an opportunity for joy. And like, why not? Because life can be stressful and unpredictable. So like, I think your closet could be like the because that's my personal goal. And if that's a client's personal goal, we'll help them achieve it too. But if they just want it to be functional, that's okay too.
It was at one point. I did a whole like what you said. I pulled everything out and put everything back, and that was like a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And now
Well,
it's back to
I think like one thing that is misunderstood is that organizing is never a one-time event. It's not like you do it once and then it's because our lives aren't static. Like our needs and what's adding value to us today is not going to be the same as what's adding value, a year from now. So we always have a paper bag for Goodwill in our car. Even as minimalists, like we probably could fill it up like once a month, I would say. Go by the Goodwill. Normally when we get a client house, it's like 2 carloads full because that's like the initial. But there is like some maintenance involved. So like if there's like a sweatshirt that you're constantly putting on and then throwing it back, we all have those things. I did that before I came here today, and it made me think. I was like, is that gonna go to the consignment? Like those are the things that maybe just need to leave or do like a seasonal refresh. Yeah.
Cool.
I hope that's helpful.
It is helpful. It's the repeated behaviors, the habits.
Yeah, and it does kind of become almost automatic. Like when you do it for long enough, you just kind of like start to identify like, hi.
All right, I think we've got another questioner here.
I just wanted to follow up or piggyback off of what her statement was, and then associated with what you were talking about with like people with anxiety, because we all know as women we have that higher than most. And so to the point specifically where you were saying these people that are like, oh, I can't give that up, or like I can't let this thing go. So how would you have that conversation with somebody that's like, well, what if I need that, especially with closets? It's like, oh, but I really love that when I bought it, and I might actually wear it one day. Like how, because I feel like with anxiety, like that holds on to the, like logically we know this isn't a thing, but our body tells us something different.
Yeah.
So how do you have that right
That's a
conversation?
really good question. Well, first, I think just anytime someone says they can't let it go, that's, you definitely can. It's a choice, but I totally understand that like fear, and we encounter that a lot. I think sometimes just having us there and giving the client permission, like we give you permission.
Like
it's
they
okay.
need that
Like,
external
absolutely.
validation.
Yeah, like talking through the possible scenarios of like, okay, and there's so much like sunk costs that we encounter where somebody bought something and they spent a lot of money on it and they can't let it go because they're only getting it $20 on Facebook Marketplace now. But the thing is, it's costing you every day that you keep it. It's costing you like it's getting in the way. It's clutter. And so wouldn't it be more valuable to get it out of the way, even if it means you lose well, you're not losing money, you already lost the money.
Right. Yeah.
So that's like, we have a lot of those conversations and like asking a lot of questions, and not to put you all on the spot, but Alex and Betsy, any specifics to add since you're our project managers?
The one thing I was thinking of about Palm was how we go dark to light, as far as arranging the clothes. So that's something that can also, like, if you are like, I've been through my clothes, everything's staying, but by going from dark to light, I feel like it really helps that sense of calm, because you see these colors and these very
Specifically dark to light, or just color coordinated in general?
Yeah, so like we start with black, and then it goes colors, gray, navy blue, and then red. Sometimes we'll do boiji bib if there's too many options, and you're just like, I don't know where to go. And then, but it's having that, I feel like immediately will.
It does, and it helps you see what you have, because you're like,
I'm legit OCD with that. Like, it's color coordinated and seasonal coordinated. I'm another level.
And I would challenge you to, so the term OCD is often misused. I like to use visually sensitive. I've started saying it because like people would be like, you're so OCD. I was like, no, that's like an actual medical diagnosis, and it's
it's a medical.
It actually is.
I have like a sprinkle of that with the anxiety.
Got it.
Yeah, I'm a fun
Not
little.
to call you out.
No, I'm
Because
a fun little basket
joke
of.
about it, and I'm like, we should joke.
No, I joke about it on myself. Like I joke about my own. No.
But like visually sensitive, like I very much am. Yeah, and so like you can feel that difference if it's like,
right,
all these different colors and all these different hangers versus like the same hanger, and then dark to light. It just is that like, So I don't know, maybe it wasn't organized in a way that like made you want to keep up with it. That's another thing. Like we try to organize things in a way that's like desirable to engage with, so that people
want to maintain it.
You want to do.
Actually, you're right. It was really complicated. There was a lot of physical like structuring. I was doing this thing where the hangers were sideways. It was a whole
too much.
A lot of people do overcomplicate.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like totally.
I want to say something else that you, or just glom on to something you just talked about the sunk cost thing too.
It's a big deal.
It's a big deal, and I get it. And I think if you can change the mindset around that, the idea that it feels wasteful to be getting rid of something that you've maybe spent so much on. But I think Facebook Marketplace is a wonderful thing in the sense that what I have seen is the thing I've been reluctant to let go of. When I give it to somebody else, the joy it brings them feels so good. If you're also looking for another place to get rid of things, we have the only furniture bank in Central Virginia here in Richmond, the Curating Furniture Bank, which is down in Manchester. And things that you donate there can go to people transitioning away from homelessness back into their apartments who need pots and pans and towels and all the things. And so you think about not just giving the things a second life, but giving a life to someone else's home. So I have found when we do some version of this with our clients, that once they know that, they're like, oh, okay, let it go.
Yeah, because if it's not serving you and it can help someone else, that feels really good. Because interestingly enough, and it's shocking that this didn't translate into hoarding, I've always personified things, even as a child. Like I would feel bad for the toys I didn't play with, I'd be like, oh, I feel so guilty, So the way I look at that is like, if I am like disregarding something or not giving something, like I'm not using it, I'm not getting value out of it, then I want someone to, and so it's going to feel better if it's out of my life and into someone else's.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful
The sunk cost is one of the hardest things for people to overcome. It's even hard for me sometimes. This didn't work out, but man, I spent a lot of
money. But it's so much money.
I know, but you're not going to get it back, so
or I got such a good deal on it. That's the one I'm guilty of. So.
Yeah, and anytime, so like we've come in, we've organized your space, and then going forward, I also wrote a blog post called I forget the full title, but consumption clutter is the main concept. You want to be mindful about what you're bringing in, what you're accepting into your life, and not just thinking about the initial cost that you're paying for it, but the cost to maintain it, the cost to store it, the cost to clean it, the cost to put it away, to fix it if it breaks, like to wash it, to do. There's so much more than just the price tag, I think. So like one thing I found is that once I mean, I've never been like a super cluttered person, but I definitely didn't identify with minimalism until after college. But now when I'm shopping, I actually don't go to stores. So that's really helpful. I'm never wandering the aisles of Target. Like, I just don't even go through that. But I think like, oh, I like that thing. That thing's really appealing to me. But then I think of my space and how everything has a home and it's all really intentional. I'm like, that's going to disrupt that. Not worth it. I don't need another candle. I don't need another shirt. I've got what I need. Moving on.
I feel like I should tell you all, y'all probably all need candles. So everybody needs candles. So.
I do have a candle and a vase problem. You actually put me on a candle like embargo or whatever, like no more. Because I'm all about like the Danish concept of hygge, you know. So I'm like, oh yeah, no lights on, all dark, just candles, mood lighting. I'm a vampire.
But you know, I think again, when you're not overly consuming. When you buy those things, they can feel like true luxuries.
Oh, it does.
Too.
Yeah, and you have more funds to put into one bucket rather than a bunch of cheap things that are already trash. Basically.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
How do you handle gifts?
Oh, so glad someone asked. So glad someone asked.
And the guilt with the gifts
Yes,
you get that you don't like.
Yep. Okay, I'm gonna tell you a story. Okay, so what we tell our clients is that it is your space. And especially if you've told someone that you don't want physical gifts and they do it anyway, they're not respecting your boundaries, so you don't owe them the storage space in your home for that thing that they gave you that you didn't want in the first place. Now, if it was just like an off-the-cuff gift, you haven't had that conversation of, hey, like, so Jonathan and I have had conversations with both of our families. We do not give or receive physical gifts at all for birthdays, holidays, any occasions. We can do experiences if we want, but we have everything we need. But there have been instances where gifts were received and we took them to Goodwill before our parents learned. And it, you know, it was like, this is just this, and it's kind of a hard conversation to have, but we haven't burned any bridges, it's fine. They're on board now.
Like, no, I mean, I was just thinking your family's lucky. I mean, Christmas is easy, right?
Like also, organization is all about boundaries. I did actually, if any of you know Rebecca Thomas with Not Another Diet, she's also another great business owner who you'd probably really like. She and I did a talk about boundaries. And boundaries obviously apply to our physical space. If our closets are overflowing, we're not respecting the boundaries of our home. If we have bad relationships, it's often boundary related. If we're not standing up for ourselves and what we need from other people, it's a boundary thing. And often you see like bad boundaries turning into clutter, turning into a lot of other things. So just thinking about that too, and like no is a complete sentence.
Love that stuff. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting. I think we often talk to our clients about how your environment shapes, you know, your outer state shapes your inner space and or your inner state, and so I think of that as influencing, but I don't know that I've ever really thought about it as also being reflective of what might be going on.
It is. There's actually I think it was Julie Morgenstern. She's like one of the OG organizers from like 30 years ago. I think it was her. It's Organizing from the Inside Out. It might not be her, but yeah, it's a really good book. It talks about just that, how
That's
like
really
our physical clutter is a manifestation of what's going on inside. And so like what I was talking about, when like you really minimize, you're faced with all that internal stuff. And it actually helps like exponentially with growth and development and reaching your goals, because you're not distracted by all that other stuff. I'm so glad someone asked about gifts. I thought about it like midway through the conversation.
And then also non-attachment. I was gonna ask you if having a space like that helps you just with general non-attachment in life. You know, I feel like that's something I'm always trying to work on.
Yeah. So I don't know if any of y'all follow the Minimalists. I've like been a fangirl of theirs. They started their blog the same year I started my company. But they talk about how letting go isn't something you do, it's something you stop doing. You stop clinging to your stuff. You hold a loose grip on everything in your life. And when it's no longer adding value, you become comfortable with saying, I can let this go, instead of clinging. You know, we're all guilty of clinging to things that don't serve us, and it you know, becomes apparent in different manifestations.
It's interesting, you said at the very beginning, ask yourself, like, when you say I can't let go of something, that's usually a fear-based.
It's a feeling.
Statement.
So identifying what that fear, what that feeling is, will often help you overcome that.
Yeah, and
having an accountability partner too, whether it's a friend or an organizer, is helpful.
To piggyback off that, because why not? When you say that you have these conversations with your clients, for people that wouldn't have someone like you coming in to do this, right? Like, we're redoing our closet over here. What would that conversation be with yourself? Like, what kind of questions are you asking, or what things are you pointing out to your clients to say, like, this is fear-based, this is where it's coming from, let's shift our thought? Like, what's that conversation look like?
Yeah.
Those questions that you're having to ask that client to really identify where it's coming from.
Yeah, well, it's really different with every person, and every client is kind of at a different place, and we try to meet them where they're at, and we're never going to be like, you have bad boundaries, and you have way too many black shirts. Like, that is never how it goes. I usually, when people see their stuff, it becomes really apparent, because, like I said, we empty everything out into, like, so if we're doing books, we get all the books together, and it's like the client is going through each book, and they're either going to put it back on the shelf or give it to us to donate. And some questions we would ask would be, obviously, have you used it, or do you love it, does it spark joy, is there something you could use instead of this? That's a big one, because just because something adds value doesn't mean you have to keep it. Like, that applies a lot to, like, kitchen gadgets and, like, really specialty things. I don't know, Alex, Betsy, what are some other clients, or some other questions we ask? I'm like, put you on the spot. But that's in that Beyond Sparking Joy, How to Decide What to Keep or Discard. I should just pull it up and read it to you guys.
I think also we ask them, do you know someone that has, like, a cake plate, that you're just like, I never use this.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to get rid of it because I might need this cake plate.
Right, yeah.
Design
You
for
have
the
a friend that has a cake plate that you can borrow.
Design for the rule, not the
Yeah.
exception.
Ooh.
So many people are designing for all these exceptions that are going to happen once a year or maybe never.
Right.
And it's like, it's your home, you're living in it every single day. You should be designing it around what's, the common thing that's occurring, not, the once a year thing.
We use that with our clients a whole lot too. And from a bigger design standpoint, they're like, well, once a year my whole family comes, and I hate this, by the way. And usually people are talking about it as this joyful experience. They're like, I gotta have some place to put everybody, and Aunt Sally, and I'm like, that's designed for you, for your home, or for how you live in it the other 364 days
Your
a
family's
year.
not going to disown you if you don't have a big
Yeah.
And if they do,
Well, that's not really to think about.
Yeah.
It's amazing though.
yeah,
I
it's
think
like
that's where like the death of the dining room came from, because nobody was using their formal dining room except for me, because it's also like the puzzle table and like the game room kind of.
Yeah.
But I was kind of like the odd one out, still like using the formal dining room, and no one else
Right.
was. And so we were turning them into home offices and,
Yeah.
and schools for homeschool and Zoom
Oh, yeah.
and like everything else. over
And
the
I think
past
that
few
hits on
years.
a really great point of like, use your home the way you want to, not the way that you're supposed to. Like, forget about what you're supposed to. If it makes sense for your dining room to be a home office, make it a home office. We actually do use our formal dining room, but we
Yeah.
don't have another we live in a 1914 fan classic layout, and it's our only dining space, but like, it's so cozy and fun. But I never had a formal dining room before. I had an open concept before, and I'm like loving the coziness of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was something else about gifts, and so good, and I can't remember what it was.
It's a timely topic, because I feel like now, like, the polish of the holidays has worn off, and everybody's like, what am I gonna do with
Oh,
this?
the disowning. Okay, so one questions that, like, have you ever gotten rid of a gift and then someone has come in and said, "Where's the thing I gave you?" So if you have, that's a boundary thing too. Like, that's like super rude. So if somebody's gonna come in and do that, that's their issue. That's not yours. So like, you're not responsible for their feelings. You can kindly say, "Hey, I really appreciate that you want to show and express your love for me, but this isn't the way that I want to receive that love. And I just want to let you know, if you're gonna give me a gift, I'm gonna donate it to somebody who needs it. And if you're uncomfortable with that, I want you to think about that before you give me the gift, because that's what's gonna happen. You know, and just like having a really kind-hearted.
She's so happy when she says
I mastered the delivery.
it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but this is what's going to happen. So think about that before you do. You know? And yeah, it's funny because like my mom couldn't help herself, and she like got me a couple things like this chapstick. And before I even left, I tried it. I was like, "Hey, Mom, I didn't like this. Do you want it?" Because I have a brand of chapstick, and she's like, "I tried." So just don't give me
That's something interesting there, because more often than not, you know, I'm imagining my mother in this scenario. If I told her you're not going to buy anything, the gift giving is so often about the giver,
It's always about the gift,
right?
Well, it's a love language, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the love
Yeah,
languages.
that's right.
So
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
And I think the more you get, so it's kind of interesting, like, the more you get your space in order, the more your life gets in order, the more your emotions get in order, the more confident you get. Like, the more you practice those boundaries in your space and in your communication, the better you get at it. It's like, I was gonna say this earlier, organizing and also like establishing boundaries in your life, it's a muscle. Just like going to the gym, you do it once, you do it twice, it gets easier and easier and easier and becomes automatic. So
Yeah.
like with our Goodwill bag, it's automatic if something needs to be donated. It's not this like thing that we carve out time for once like 4 times a year. It's just like, this is going in the Goodwill. It's first step is put it by the door. Next step, whoever goes down to the car puts it in the bag. Then the final step is whoever's near the Goodwill, when the bag is full, drops it off. And it's just like,
Yeah.
you know.
So I have to tell you, I feel like I'm having like a personal little therapy session right here.
That's much of our work.
I mean, I am supposed to be an expert. I'm supposed to like know all about environment design, and this is what we do. And my New Year's intention for the year was to practice better boundaries and to just say no. So I believe Evo is calling
hot topic
me.
lately.
Is calling me the it's my dare. I'm on my dare journey to just say no. So I'm like I feel like somehow I manifested this evening when I was like, yeah, let's just talk about the intersection of design and organizing.
And you know what? I say
Tell
no
me
to
more.
so many speaking invites and event invites because I'm like, that doesn't interest me.
Yeah.
Like, part of minimalism to me is only saying yes to the things that are of high value, that are in line with what I'm interested in, passionate about. And so it was an immediate yes.
That's awesome.
When you like, yeah, I didn't even wait an hour to respond. I was like, yes.
Yeah, I did feel a little like the girl, like that's like, oh, he called. You know? When she responded, I was like, oh, great, she's as excited as I am.
No, I got asked to do like 2 other speaking gigs, like in January. I was like, no, thank you, but I appreciate you thinking of me. You know,
Yeah.
like, you know.
Well, I think we definitely share a passion for what we do, in that I think we know that it's not just about having beautifully organized spaces or well designed pretty spaces. It's
a
how does this make you better? You know,
How does it
how
make you
does
better? And the whole like
yeah.
dream, any home can be a dream home. It's about the energy of a home, and it's about the energy of the person who lives there. So like, I think that when you are really clear with your intentions and your space reflects that, it doesn't matter how high end or thrifted or whatever your stuff is. If it's clean and it's honest and it's genuine, people are gonna feel that. You're going to feel that. It almost like doesn't matter how it looks from like an architectural digest perspective. It's more, it is a feeling. So I do feel like every home at every budget point in my life has been my dream home, because it's also been a priority. So making it, you know, a lot of people are like, I don't have time to do this. And I was talking to my husband the other day. I was like, it's not really that people don't have time. It's just that they're not able to, or they don't choose to prioritize it.
Yeah.
Because you can literally have one priority at a time. That's what a priority is. And so
Yeah, I don't know who started to pluralize priorities, but
no,
yeah,
that's
it's not a thing.
Yeah. So I'm very much a minimalist about my calendar, my commitments, like the way I run my company. Like, it is a philosophy that guides every decision that I make. It's like very holistic, but that way you're able to give 100% to the things you say yes to. So no becomes really easy. You know that you're protecting the things that matter to you by saying no, whether that's your space or your calendar or your relationships.
Well, I know we've thrown out a lot of other reading suggestions. Have you ever read Essentialism at all?
No.
You would love this book too. So if any of you are trying to think about like doing the inside work, this is a book that came out probably 5 or 6 years ago. But it's the idea of how do you say no? Saying no makes room for the yes,
Yeah.
and a really good yes. And I that's
A really good
a
yes.
really good yes.
Yeah,
And
I like that.
I think he also said, if it's not a hell yes, then it's a hell no.
I agree.
And I really like that.
I
So
agree.
yeah.
Who wrote that?
Greg McEwen.
We were also talking about Atomic Habits.
Yes. Oh, yes. Another one of my favorite. I just revisited it for like the third time this year, and it's all about just the tiny little things that you can do. And he talks a lot about how you can make choices to build your environment that help you make better choices. And so that's another great one if you're thinking about this as a journey from the inside out. I highly recommend both of those books.
It has to be a journey from the inside out for it to be successful. Like first identifying your why, and then subtracting the things that don't support that.
Yeah.
And it's a process. I've been doing minimalism for like 15 years, and the organizing company for 13. So don't feel like it's gonna happen overnight, because it won't. It's like peeling back layers of an onion, and we tell clients this too. It's like on your first pass, a lot of times after we leave, our clients are like, after you left, I got rid of 3 more bags of stuff because I looked at it again. It was all organized. You saw all the black shirts together and was like, well, I can subtract a few more of those.
It becomes a way of seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a way of seeing.
I like that. I feel like you just gave me a lot of homework to do in a
Well,
good way,
yes.
but I'm like, I gotta reevaluate some things. So. I want to make sure everybody else has a chance. Yeah.
There's a writer, a book author and blogger that I followed for a long time, who I feel like she's kind of a blend of you. If you say you lean toward maximalism, but she calls herself a cozy minimalist.
Oh.
And her philosophy is the least number of things that it takes for me to feel like my home is cozy and beautiful.
That's my
and
philosophy
comfortable.
too.
So it's it's a little different for everybody.
It's like the right
Some
amount.
people, yeah,
Yes.
some people are more toward the maximal side. And one of her other phrases that goes along with the constraints, but she calls it a lovely limitation. And I like that phrase too.
Nice alliteration.
Yeah, because it goes, okay, I have limitations. Maybe it's my budget, maybe it's my space, maybe it's my headspace to do something. Like, I'm just going to call it a lovely limitation and then figure out what my best solution is inside that limitation.
That's great.
And
I love
reframing it.
I also-
Who's this person? What's her name?
Her name's Michaelyn Smith.
Okay.
And she goes by the Nester, and
Okay.
she lives in North Carolina, so
Awesome.
she's
Check her out.
not too far away.
I love the phrase
Yeah.
radical acceptance too. One of my organizer friends in California, she had moved to this beautiful house and she had like a kitchen that she hated, and I was like, how did you deal with that? Because I currently have a kitchen I hate. It's going to take us a while to save up to renovate it the way that we want. And so I'm practicing radical acceptance right now. And it also worked. It's because it's like, this is the way it is. And in order to do it right, I have to wait. I have to be patient. I'm not a patient person, believe it or not. I've learned to control my impulses, but he's witnessed some fails, many returns to the store. Yeah, so there's also like this one room in our house, our home office. This was the room I kept trying to put a rug down because the floor was it's over 100-year-old home. We had the floors refinished, but there's still a lot of character. And there was like these couple areas that were really making me twitch. And I kept putting rugs down. I was like, oh, this just doesn't feel right. And finally I was like, I'm gonna practice radical acceptance. I'm gonna look at that scratch in the floor and accept it. And I've been doing it, and it was just like a mind shift. It was just a mind shift change.
So what does that actually look like? You just look at it and say repeatedly, like,
Well,
I'm okay with this.
So I think society and advertisers tell us that our lives and our homes need to look a certain way, and if they don't, we're failing somehow. So reframing it in a way that makes sense for you. Like, why is it bad that there's a scratch in my floor? Really, like, questioning everything and think, like, is it actually bothering me, or is it just because I feel like there's supposed to not be a scratch right there? And I did do a couple things to draw your eye upward in the space, so that helped, like the clock that I mentioned that grounded the desks instead of a rug. But now when I walk in, I'm like, this is fine, I'm done, and you're so grateful. He's had to like haul 2 giant rugs back to West Elm. He goes, I ordered one. You go, I can't wait to return it. So finally I was like, no, this is fine. Like, it's fine as it is. The kitchen is fine. Well, I haven't totally accepted the kitchen. I still hate it. But
I love the idea
radical
of practicing
It's just coming to peace with the way things are and things that you cannot change instead of constantly being annoyed by it.
I never thought I'd hear somebody reference Tara Brach in design conversation.
Is that a Tara Brach quote?
It's a book that she wrote.
Is it called Radical Acceptance?
It's her name.
Okay, well, so my friend in California didn't just come up with this herself. I need to read that book.
Yes, there's one more Nestor quote for you. Her phrase like, "It doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful," which is probably especially good with clients
And
for like
perfect
something
does not
bothers them.
exist.
Right.
I call myself a recovering perfectionist because for many years, and it's funny, my mom told me she went through this in her young adult life. You thought one day everything's gonna come together. My life's just gonna be perfect. Like you think that when you're in college or whatever.
Yeah.
And then life goes on and you're like, that day has not come.
Yeah.
What am I doing wrong?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, perfect doesn't exist. Life is actually completely out of control and chaotic.
Yeah.
There are some things that we can control or at least feel like we're controlling, like our homes and our environments. And so, my term for what you're saying is warm minimalism. I did not make that up,
that's good.
but I saw that somewhere and was like, that's what that is. Like the sort of plants, warm materials, like it's not sterile, it's not cold. Not that if you want to live in a sterile, cold house, that's fine. I'm not going to judge you for it. Some people probably think my house is sterile and cold. I'm glad I have your
definitely
opinion.
not. But I love that idea of it doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. There's a book I read a while ago. It was like Perfectly Imperfect.
Wabi Sabi.
Yes, yeah, and it's I think my favorite spaces I've ever been in, they're interesting spaces, they're meaningful spaces. I have an aversion to matchy match, to things that people would say are so perfect, and you can go into a space.
It feels almost contrived.
And it feels contrived.
Yeah.
I mean, I say this as a designer, but there's no worse feeling than walking into a house and being like, a designer's been here. Like because it doesn't feel authentic. It feels a little too perfect.
Mm-hmm. It took me 7 years to get my last house how I wanted it, and I lived there for 9.
Mm.
And I say that we're gonna live in our current house until we can't go up the 3 flights of stairs because it's a 3rd floor condo. But deep down, I'm like, once that's finished, I'm probably gonna be like, okay, time to move. Next project. Because even though I'm so impatient and I'm like, I want the kitchen done now. As soon as it's done, I'm gonna go like, the floor down.
Yeah.
There's nothing
There's
to improve.
the joy in
the
improving
process.
and process.
And I need to accept that about myself and embrace it instead of acting like the journey is not the most fun part. Because it is.
Love that.
Yeah, there's I think it takes a long time. Like if anyone has just moved, it takes a long time to get home to feel just right. Like a really long time.
I'm guilty of that. I want it to have that very
me too.
layered, like I've been there forever feel in the first day. But it does take living in a space, I think, a while. It takes a while of living in a space to really fill it out. To know what
I also have an expression or saying that's like, ask the space what it wants to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't come into a new home with your ideas of exactly what it's going to be. Kind of listen. Don't do anything for a while because it'll often tell you after living there for a while. So, for example, I've been obsessing over our foyer since we moved in because I've never had a foyer. I'm like so fancy. It used to be just like walk into the fan shotgun house and you're in. The stairs are there and you're in the living room. And so now I have like an entrance hall and a foyer and it's like all this breathing room. And I was like, okay, so I guess I need to pick out a bench and a mirror and and I was like, okay, those are my adding tendencies. Like that's not, I returned many things that I tried to put on the wall. Had my handyman patch and paint over the fresh paint job that had gotten done before I moved in. It's fine. But so I put up that wall art and I love it. And I was like, okay, now I need a bench. And then I was like, well, no one's going to use a bench. Like, no one's going to come in and then sit down right there. Like, I don't need a bench. So I was thinking back to Japanese culture, and they have this thing called a Genkan room. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but it's like you come in, and it's a space to take your shoes off, which we're a no-shoes house, and sort of leave the outside behind and transition. It's a different type of flooring. And also thinking about their concept of negative space, I was like, this is the breathing room. It doesn't need to have anything in it except this beautiful art and a rug to anchor the space. Because what we noticed having people over is it's where we have the first and the last conversation of the night, where you linger. We lingered there.
Yeah.
And so, like, it didn't need anything other than art and a rug. And so I was like, I was excitedly telling you, you're on like a work call. You're like, okay, whatever. We'll see how long that sticks. But I was very excited about that. It doesn't need anything.
It doesn't. It's
And how much money did I just save not spending a fortune on a beautiful sculptural bench?
And there is that.
I always love saving money. I always love that.
See, I like your thinking. I'm like, and now what else can I spend that money on?
Yeah. Kitchen renovation fund.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, any last questions before we?
I have a question about organizing kids.
Yes.
Great question.
And I'm sure this, I mean, it goes with a lot of the gifting, definitely falls into that, and setting those boundaries, and you said setting limitations by example, and I feel like our culture teaches kids to want and want and want, and that's a really hard thing, and
Yeah.
you can put all the stuff away, but you must spend a lot of time putting all the stuff in there, and how you guys handle that.
Yeah, so it really is about putting boundaries on it and saying like, so kids we've found, I think Claire taught me this, that they use their imagination. Less is more with kids. Like they also just want to be with you. And so like they'll play with pots and pans. They'll mix different characters from different toys together and make up a story about it. So having too much is actually overwhelming. It's like going into the deodorant aisle at Target and trying to pick something out. It's like major decision fatigue, or having too many clothes to choose from. It's like, that's why Barack Obama and Steve Jobs had a uniform, because that's one less decision they have to make. So like eliminating that decision fatigue for kids is really important, and it empowers them to be able to clean up their own space when there's only like 4 cubes worth of toys instead of like an entire room that is a tornado after like 5 minutes. And often doing like a toy rotation, so especially when they're younger and they're not noticing that you're like taking things away and putting new things in, and getting them involved too with the process at a young age, and saying like, and some kids are better about this than others, but like, hey, it's our quarterly minimize, let's give this to some kids who don't want it anymore. And some kids will jump on that, others won't. It just depends on personality.
We did that with my kids, and I remember my son Owen, the first time I did it, I was like, God, it was like a month or two before Christmas, and I was like, oh my God, he's like getting all these toys for Christmas. Where are we gonna put it? And so I started like organizing, and I brought Owen into it, and I was like, you know, we're gonna donate these. Well, I think I had a pile of things that were going. He was like, no, Mom, I need this. And it was a Thomas the Train thing, and he had all these other Thomas the Train things, and he wanted this one, and I was like, honey, you don't play with this one, you have all these. He's like, but it's my, you know, and I said, you know what we're gonna do with all this stuff? We're going to donate it to other kids so they can play with it. And I know that there's a little boy out there that would love this train set, because it's different from your other train sets. And he like, you could see him think about a boy who didn't have a Thomas the Train set, and he was like,
What a
yes.
world, right?
How insane. Yeah, Mom. And I think he needs this thing too. And it was like,
What else
it
can
changed it.
And that's such a
changed
great
the story.
character development moment
Yeah.
and opportunity too.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid, we had like we had to earn our toys. Like the only time we just got toys for free was our birthday and then Christmas. And then otherwise we had to like do a chore chart thing, and that was really helpful, because then you understood that it wasn't this like unlimited thing.
Okay, what about teenagers? So now they're
It's a
old
little
enough
harder.
to control their space. Yeah. How do you
Who has a
bring them
teenager
in?
who would like to
You
weigh in?
close the door.
Yeah. Until it's time
But
to
let's be honest, they don't. Let's be honest. You know they don't let you in the room anyway. So it's
You
just
might
safer.
not want to go in there also, right?
Yeah, and I mean also like there was a time period where I lived with my brother when I was at that apartment between architecture and starting my organizing company, and I had various roommates, and then my brother lived there, and he was messy. So what I learned, it's kind of like a radical acceptance moment before I learned what that was. I would imagine, this was like a mind trick, that room was not part of the apartment. It was not a reflection of me. It was not part of my house at all. It was like a separate building, and that really helped. Like I would visually black hole it in my brain. So then I was like, whatever, you do your thing. That was helpful because teenagers, I mean, they're kind of adults almost, but they're not, so it's harder.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you guys have any experience working with our clients with teenagers? Like, I feel like we've seen it backslide before. Like, we've organized it and then come back and it's a mess. Other times they've really like embraced it. It's just a lot of it depends on personality because you can't control other people, no matter how hard you might want to.
Well, earlier you were talking about spouses, like one spouse might call us because they're all about it, but then their partner is not, but then they get jealous of the beautiful closet. So I've seen that with
Well, it's
one of our clients that has teenagers.
Yeah, it's so funny too because we see a lot of finger pointing when people call. Like, my spouse is so messy, and I'm so organized, and then we go through the process, and it's like, girl, you got a lot of stuff too. So I think by like setting the example, truly setting the example, the other people in your family are gonna feel that. But like maybe reflecting inward first, and then seeing what the reaction from the other family members is.
I love this. Thank you so much for just sharing deeply about your experience, but just how to think about this differently, because it can feel like a chore. It can be daunting. And I think just for me, just not thinking about it as a place of like depriving myself of
No,
things
it's never
or
about that.
stripping away, like really just editing in a way that is freeing. I think I'm wishing I had my little notepad to write things down. So you've given some great gems. Oh, right.
I love Minima. I will probably never truly retire. It's kind of my life's work. I'm sure it'll evolve 5 more times between now and my death. But I feel like minimalism and like the stuff we've talked about have allowed me to reach goals and attract a partner that I never imagined possible in my life. Like, it's amazing the doors that start to open when you let go and you stop clinging and you start to really like follow your inner voice and your values. Yeah.
All right, so if people in the room don't follow you, where can they find more of this wisdom?
So I'm most active on Instagram at minima_organizing. And then our website, minimaonline.com. I have a monthly journal and a newsletter, so I write about this a lot. I haven't shared this with anyone, but I'm taking a writing course that the minimalists are teaching. I hope I get in their writing course. They have a 48-hour subscription window later in February, and I'm thinking about writing my first book in the next couple of years.
I would read that book all day
I'm
long.
putting it out so there's accountability. Y'all heard it first.
I love that.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I'd buy that book and give it to people, but first I'd ask if they're okay with me giving them to them.
Just tell them be sure to minimize it when you're done.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being here and being with us in this
I love this.
space.
Yeah.
It was great. And thank you all for being here. And I hope we see you back in here again. So
Oh yeah, and
Very soon.
if you want to get in touch, I forgot to bring most of my business cards.